Earlier, we talked about what I call the mismatch between sleep ability and sleep opportunity. And I showed you how that works. We did a graph, I plotted your time in bed, I plotted your total sleep time, and I showed you that there's this gap between what you can do and the opportunity that you're giving yourself. And we talked about how do you make those lines overlap? How do you close the gap? And of course the first thing that you said was, well, you take the total sleep time line and you push it up. And that was a very good response, and that's what you've been trying to do, and that's what we try to do with medication. But the alternative, of course, is to take this line, the opportunity that you're giving yourself, which you are not able to do, and match it to what you are able to do. So to take that mismatch and align what we can align, which is the opportunity to the ability. So what I want to do, and I think that struck you as common sense, and the therapeutic implication of that may not be clear yet, but what I'd like to do now is show you the way we think about how insomnia develops over time and point to the place where that mismatch probably occurs. Okay? So let's do that. So, as always, we're going to draw a graph. And as always, the ordinate and the abscissa on this graph are going to be the same things we're always dealing with. So in terms of the abscissa, this is time, okay, because the abscissa is always time. And in terms of the ordinate, this is going to be, I'm sorry for my handwriting, this is going to be bad, and this is going to be good. Okay? And we're going to draw a threshold line here. And what we're really saying by the threshold line is, if you're below this, you don't experience yourself as having insomnia. In fact, not even poor sleep. Let's just call this zone down here the range of good sleep. And then maybe up here is sort of poor sleep, and this is sort of awesome sleep, but this is all more or less normal good sleep. All right, so getting back to the model, we've drawn our ordinate and said that this is basically from good to bad sleep. We've drawn our abscissa and said this is time. What we haven't talked about is what is time. What kind of time are we talking about? Is this birth? Is this death? No. Is this elementary school? Is this college? No. This is actually a weird form of time. This is, let's call it not sick. I'm sorry, I have really bad handwriting. Let's call this acutely ill. Let's call this chronically ill. And let's call this treatment. Okay? And what I want to plot over time is how various factors factor in as you cross the trajectory from not being ill to acutely ill, chronically ill, to what treatment's going to do. And we're going to do this with 4 factors. So, let's see how many colors we have. 3! 4 factors. Okay? So, the first factor, oh, by the way, a lot of people call this the 4-factor model, because there's 4 factors. Some people call it the 4P model, which is sort of a pun on the 3P model. But the whole reason we're calling it 3P or 4P is simply because it's a way of remembering the various factors. Each of them begin with a P. We're going to cover that very briefly now. So this is one factor, and this P we'll call the predisposing factor, or PD. So that's one factor. Another factor, nicely in red, we will call the precipitating factor. So they're going to all be P's and F's. Precipitating, PC factor. Predisposing factor. Oops, I'd like that to be in blue. Okay. The next one green because it's really what makes insomnia go in the long term. We're going to call this the perpetuating factor. And finally, there's a good story behind this one that I'm not going to share with you, but we didn't actually have a P for this factor way back when because we weren't clever enough to figure out a P for this factor. But this factor is about classical conditioning. There is a P for that, Pavlovian conditioning. So this is going to be the Pavlovian factor. Okay? And I'm not going to describe these quite yet. What I want to do is talk about how these unravel in time. So when you're not sick, there's a certain level of predisposition that everyone carries with them. There was a time that they thought certain people are predisposed to insomnia and certain people are not. I think more current thinking on this is everybody's predisposed to insomnia simply because it's part of a stress response. If you get stressed, you get hyperactivation, you get elevations in adrenaline and things of that sort, and those are things that cause persistent wakefulness, which we might call insomnia. So currently, I think the current thinking is that everyone is predisposed to insomnia for at least the reason of everyone's predisposed to stress and to having stress responses. But the traditional way of thinking about this P is that it spans the entirety of the biopsychosocial spectrum. So a biological predisposition might be that you have the metabolic rate of a chipmunk, so that your normal heart rate is 115 beats per minute. Well, that's quite high, and so that puts you at a higher level of basal arousal such that it won't take you much to reach a level of arousal that's insomnogenic. Okay, that's a biological factor. Psychological factor might be you're a worrier. You know, you tend to worry about things. And if your baseline is worry, it's not hard to get from worried to fearful. It's not hard to get from worried to catastrophic thinking. So that would be a psychological, potential set of psychological factors. And finally, the social factors are hardly ever the attention of anyone, which is, take for example that you're an owl and you marry a lark. Well, those are two very different sleep schedules. One person's going to bed at 9 or 10, the other person's going to bed at 1, 2, or 3 in the morning. So if you find yourself in that scenario, somebody's going to be going to bed early. And if it's the husband who's the owl, you can bet he'll be following the lark's schedule. Except he's not biologically prepared to sleep at 10 o'clock at night, or 9 o'clock at night, or 10:30 at night. He's biologically prepared to sleep at 3 in the morning. So guess what he might develop because of social factors? Sleep onset insomnia. So we've talked about, for the first P, for the predisposing factor, that all of us are predisposed. It probably varies in magnitude, individual to individual. Some people may be a little bit biologically predisposed, some people a lot. Some people may be a little bit psychologically predisposed, some people a lot. Some people may be, where was I? Social. Some people may be not socially predisposed to insomnia, some people may be a lot. So you can imagine that this varies in magnitude, individual to individual. Now, in the original model done by Art Spielman, predisposing factors really didn't vary much with time. Whether this is time and illness time, as we've demarcated it here, or whether this is lifespan. The original conceptualization was that that predisposition is sort of a trait thing. That's probably not true. If you believe in this biopsychosocial perspective, what happens if you were single and now you're married? You're an owl, she's a lark. This has got to be changing with time. Okay? And it's probably true. And I should add, by way of defense to Art Spielman, who developed the 3P model, that his newer version or newer rendition of this model takes that into account, and predisposition does vary with time. All right, so that's predisposition. Just get a little blue in there. All right. The next thing is precipitation. That something happens to throw you over the line. And again, This can span the entirety of the biopsychosocial spectrum. The bio may be a medical illness. And it may not be the illness itself that triggers the insomnia, although that's possible. It may be simply you broke your leg or you hurt your back and you can't sleep in a position that's comfortable for you. And so it may be for that simple a reason that suddenly you can't initiate or maintain sleep. That's a biological example. A psychological example may be you're worried. You're having a problem at work and your boss is upset and you think that your job is on the line. That ought to get you up and over the line. Okay? That would be a psychological factor. Social factor we've already covered, which may be you were single, now you're married, up and over the line you go. Okay? So we have predisposition, we have precipitation. And frankly, there's not anything really interesting about this part of the model. This is the sort of the no-duh part of the model. You have predisposition, it interacts with a life stressor or perceived threat. You have a stress diathesis, you express the disorder. No big deal. This is a stress diathesis model. I may not be able to snap my fingers, but I can pop my cheek. What makes this model so interesting is the next piece, which is Art Spielman's observation that sooner or later, people are going to take notice less of the stressor, less of the thing that precipitated their insomnia, and start focusing more on, damn it, I can't sleep. And this is not good. And I don't feel good during the day. I feel tired. I feel sleepy. And the natural response to that is, if I feel sleepy, if I'm feeling tired, I must not be getting enough sleep. And clearly I'm not, because I can't fall asleep very easily, and I'm waking up across the night. So what is the logical conclusion that one would make? If I'm losing sleep, I should make an effort to recover it. And since I can't force myself to sleep, and since I can't force myself to stay awake, since I can't force myself to sleep, either fall asleep or stay asleep, the only thing I can do is increase my opportunity to get more sleep. This is this mismatch that we talked about earlier. So what do? If you had a bad night last night and it's Saturday, you can sleep in. And you know what? You might be able to. And you know what? You might feel better. And so you're likely to do it again. Similarly, if you had a bad night last night, or the night before, or for a whole week, or whatever, and you can go to bed early the next night, you might do that. And you might be able to fall asleep, and you might get more sleep. Similarly, you might nap. All of these three things, going to bed early, getting out of bed late, napping, we call sleep extension. And this is the thing that is considered by and large the perpetuating factor. So remember, we have predisposing, precipitating, now we're into perpetuation, the perpetuating factor. And the idea here is that with time, you get another piece to the pie, if you will, another bar on the bar graph. And this is the fact that your sleep ability is not the same as you were when you were here. Your sleep ability has gone down, and or you've extended your sleep opportunity to get more sleep, but your sleep ability hasn't really changed that much, and all of a sudden this perpetuating factor kicks into gear. Because you can sleep 6, but you're in bed for 7. You can sleep 6, but you're in bed for 8. All right, now, let me be clear about a point here that's fairly subtle. Most of us think that sleep extension is a fact. That when you don't sleep well, you try and recover lost sleep. There is, of course, another possibility, which is you now have a sleep ability that went from 8, because of this, to 6, but you're keeping an 8-hour schedule. And so that mismatch is still there, but not because you sleep extended, simply because you didn't sleep reduce. You didn't match your opportunity to your ability. And so that mismatch exists. All right. So the next bar I want to add here is the Pavlovian factor. And we've alluded to this before, but think about what happens when night after night, week after week, month after month, what you have is you walk into the bedroom and you look at that bed and you think, that bed's no friend of mine. I'm in for another bad night. And you feel a little anxious. And then you get into bed and you're frustrated and you're annoyed and you're awake, and this is the important bit, you're awake for prolonged periods of time. What are we doing? In this scenario, when you don't have the illness expressed, it's bed, sleepy, bed, sleep, bed, sleepy, bed, sleep. Well, sleepiness and sleep have a physiology. And that physiology, that bodily state, is being paired over and over again with your comforter, your pillow, your bed. So that it should be the case in good sleepers that you just look at your bed and your pillow and your comforter and feel sleepy and want to sleep. You feel it overtaking you. Okay? I have a personal example of this. I read in bed. I've been reading the same book for about 10 years. The reason that is when I get into bed, I open the book and drop it. And I'm unconscious. I'm asleep. Why is that? Because every night when I'm sleepy and preparing for sleep, I read the same book. In fact, if I even try and read that book in the middle of the afternoon, it'll knock me out. So that's an example of a very well-conditioned stimuli that has a good positive association, something we would want. Now, I probably shouldn't drive and read that book. That'll be a problem. In this situation, when you have repeated pairing over and over and over again of the physiology of irritation, of annoyance, of anxiety, or forget all that stuff. Let's say this is actually somewhat resolved. Just the physiology of wakefulness, over and over and over again associated with bed, pillow, comforter, bed, pillow, comforter. It should be the case that instead of eliciting, like my book does, your bedroom or the patient's with insomnia's bedroom elicits at minimum wakefulness and at maximum elicits annoyance, irritation, and anxiety. So let's take an example. You will often hear from patients that they're falling asleep while they're trying to stay awake out on the couch. And that they walk into the bedroom and boom, it's like a switch. They're suddenly awake. And the attribution that the patient usually makes is, I shouldn't walk so fast, or I shouldn't have brushed my teeth, that they were too alerting. Well, it had nothing to do with the walking or the brushing of the teeth or the disrobing for sleep or putting on the jammies too fast. It had to do with this set of stimuli no longer elicit sleep and sleepiness from you, they elicit wakefulness, if not irritation and anxiety. So this is the Pavlovian piece, and let's make that nice and contributory, nice and big. So, the last part of the story I want to tell here is that what happens with treatment, in fact, forget about treatment. Okay.
Forget about treatment. We're going to war!
That's right, we're going to war. Let's actually forget about treatment for a second. Inevitably, whatever this stressor was, it's going to resolve with time. And so what may very well happen is, let's go ahead and move treatment out a little bit and just allow for time in here as well. Okay, so this will just be time. This may completely resolve, or almost completely. It's certainly not causing you to be above threshold. That with time, like they say, the tincture of time, time heals all wounds, blah, 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 blah. Well, we expect that that would happen. And in fact, in lots of people, probably what does happen is this goes away and the insomnia goes away. Okay, the precipitant goes away, the insomnia goes away. However, for the people that were engaging in the venial sin, if not mortal sin, of sleep extension, and the people who have been well conditioned because they spend tremendous amounts of time in bed awake and pissed off, these factors more than likely now become the lion's share of what is maintaining the disorder. Now, I should note that it would be lovely to know quantitatively what these contributing factors are over time. But we don't know that because we don't have, this is a theory, we don't have a natural history study to say precisely what this trajectory is, what this trajectory is, and what this is, how much these things are contributory over time. These are speculations that fit our clinical experience. Okay. So what we're saying is everybody's predisposed to varying degrees from individual to individual, that shit happens and precipitates or triggers an insomnia, that with time, persistence of the insomnia, people do something, that something is not helpful, that something is sleep extension, that they're forcing a mismatch between their current ability and their current opportunity, and they're giving rise to the opportunity to be conditioned, or in this case, negatively conditioned, maladaptively conditioned, by spending huge amounts of time in bed awake. So that the bedroom becomes stimuli, not for sleepiness and sleep, but for wakefulness. Then, over time, this diminishes, and the things that keep the insomnia in place are the perpetuating factors and the Pavlovian factors. And the interesting thing is when you start treating different patient populations with insomnia who have very different precipitating circumstances, you would think insomnia, CBT-I would work variably across clinical populations because this is so terribly important. And it turns out, no, for most clinical populations, from cancer to depression to pain, chronic pain, did I say cancer? To cancer, to chronic pain, to depression, this isn't really that important. It's these things, because the reason we think that is because therapy works about equally well for all of these populations. So in the end, that's evidence for these are the things that matter. Now, with therapy, we're not going to address your predisposing factors. And that's unfortunate in some ways because we really might be able to address those, if we could have 12 sessions or 20 sessions, but we don't have 12 or 20 sessions. With treatment, we're going to assume that your precipitating factor becomes even less, just naturally over time, not because anybody addressed it. Now here's the interesting thing. This is what we target in therapy. We're going to target your sleep extension. We're going to target that mismatch. Okay? And we're going to do probably a pretty good job of it, and it probably will get you to here. And then, I haven't drawn the Pavlovian factor as if it's more contributory, but I'm going to speculate that it is. In fact, we're going to give you more credit than that. We're going to put you right on the line. Okay? That you've gone from being a nasty, horrible sleeper to just a mild insomnia. And basically what I'm trying to show here is that from this point when you come into therapy, taking into account time, by the time therapy ends you're going to be 50% better. Okay? Because we took this out of play. We took the perpetuating factors out of play. Now here's the really interesting thing. If you extend this line even further, outside of therapy, long after you leave our offices, this we're going to assume stays the same. This we're going to assume is even less contributory. This we're going to assume you've taken care of because of the great therapy experience that you've had. And this, with time and repairing of your bed with sleep and sleepiness over and over again, is going to be non-contributory. So what we would predict is long after treatment is that there should be another clinical gain. And what we reliably see in very long-term studies of 6, 12, and 24 months is that this is the acute treatment gain and that people continue to get better and better with time. So the story I've tried to share with you here of the 4P model is that everybody's predisposed, though this may vary by individual. Shit happens. And so long as it is a real or perceived stressor, or it is for some reason physically or psychiatrically stressful to you, you're going to get an insomnia response, and it's going to happen again, by the way. It's not that what we've done here is going to eliminate this from ever happening again. Of course it's going to happen again. And we're going to talk more about that in relapse prevention. We've focused you on this and said sleep extension is a natural thing to do. It's very positively reinforcing because it feels good, you feel better during the day. The only problem is you create a huge mismatch between your ability and your opportunity, and that necessarily will perpetuate insomnia all by itself. Then, by being awake in bed for long stretches of time, you become conditioned. We target this with therapy. Here's your clinical outcome. If you hang with it, there will be a counter-conditioning where this will be minimized all by itself, just by pairing bed with sleep, bed with sleep, bed with sleep. This is the 4P model.